Welcome to the Sleepy Braindose. Tonight, let us take a calm journey together, from birds in the sky to rockets beyond Earth. You will hear gentle stories of flight, told slowly, without rush, like a steady breath. May this soft rhythm bring you knowledge, and at the same time, help you rest, safe and at ease. When you look back into the long story of humanity, before the engines, before the theories, before even the first sketches of machines, you can imagine a quiet moment that repeats across generations. A human being looking upward, resting the eyes on a bird in motion. The world of our ancestors was slower, with fewer distractions than the world we know now. Days were marked by sunlight and shadow, by the rhythm of work and rest. And within those open stretches of time, the flight of birds became a source of wonder. In the stillness of fields, on the edges of forests, or along riverbanks, people noticed that some creatures lived not only on the ground, but also in the air. Their movements seemed effortless, graceful, and often mysterious. You may sense the calm curiosity of those moments, as if the first science began not in laboratories, but in silent observation. Under the wide sky dot, it is possible that the earliest humans did not even frame their questions in words, but in feelings. Watching a bird take off might have carried with it both admiration and longing. How can something so light lift itself against the pull of the earth? How does it know where to go, how to move its wings, how to find balance in the invisible currents of air? These questions were not yet technical. They were almost poetic. The sight of a bird circling above a valley or gliding along a ridge stirred both imagination and reflection. People may have felt that if they could understand these motions, they might share in that freedom dot as communities developed language and stories. Birds entered myths and symbols. They became messengers between the earth and the sky, beings that could travel where humans could not. In many cultures, birds were thought to carry news from the gods, to cross boundaries between the known and the unknown. The eagle, the falcon, the raven, each carried meanings that went beyond feathers and wings. These were not only spiritual signs, but also early steps toward careful noticing. To give symbolic power to a bird is already to admit that its flight is something set apart, something worth attention. You might imagine the sense of calm a watcher felt while following the slow spiral of a hawk against the background of clouds, the way the eye could relax into the steady rhythm of wings. The practical mind, too, was at work. Hunters observed the movements of birds to predict the behavior of animals or the coming of seasons. Farmers noticed the arrival and departure of migratory flocks as signs of weather and harvest. In this way, flight was not only a mystery, but also a pattern, something that could help in survival. Even then, the foundation of science was being laid: observation, repetition, recognition of rhythm. The birds showed that the air itself had order, that there were rules hidden in motion. Even if no one yet had words for aerodynamics dot, if you close your eyes, you may picture the slow rise of a crane over a wetland. Its wings beat in steady rhythm, the tips spreading wide, catching the lift of air that is invisible but strong. A person watching could sense that the wing does not simply push downward, but also leans against the air in a way that creates balance. Without equations, without diagrams, early observers may have begun to intuit the same truths that later science would describe. The calm, continuous watching of flight was a form of meditation on nature's quiet laws. Through centuries, the Asturies, fascination deepened. In ancient China, kites were invented not only as toys, but as tools for studying wind. They were simple, made of bamboo and silk, but in their rising and drifting, people learned that the air had structure, that it could hold weight if guided properly. The kite was perhaps one of the first bridges between bird flight and human. Experiment, a gentle step toward understanding. Imagine the serenity of a child in an open field, watching the kite sway against the sky, noticing how the string vibrates with the pull of the wind. That same experience continues today, linking us with those first quiet studies in Greece. Philosophers such as Aristotle took interest in animals and their movements. He described the beating of wings, the balance of bodies in air, the patterns. Of flight, his language was simple, not mathematical, but his effort to describe what he saw shows the shift from mere wonder to structured curiosity. In his writings, we find one of the first systematic accounts of how humans thought about birds. It was not yet the full science of aerodynamics, but it was the beginning of patient, thoughtful description. You can almost hear the rhythm of his thought, steady and unhurried, like a calm breath set to words. Across other cultures, similar reflections appeared. In India, the Garuda, a bird-like figure, symbolized strength and speed. In Egypt, the falcon-headed god Horus embodied vision and power. These symbols carried cultural weight, but at their heart lay the same fact. People could not ignore the ability of birds to move where humans could not. Watching wings move against the wind, people saw a possibility that was always just beyond reach. The longing for flight was not restless in those early times. It was more a soft background thought, present with every upward glance. You may notice how observation, myth, and practice slowly wove together. At first, flight was simply seen. Then it was storied. Then it became part of prediction and survival. Each step deepened the human relationship with the sky. The rhythm of wings was like the rhythm of tides or seasons, steady, recurring, part of the world's order. People trusted it, the way they trusted sunrise and rain. This trust in rhythm created a sense of safety. Even when life on the ground was uncertain, the flight of birds reminded them of continuity, of cycles larger than human struggle. From these beginnings, you can sense how the dream of flying was not sudden, but slow, unfolding like the spread of wings. Long before machines, long before formulas, the calm observation of birds laid the first stones of knowledge. The details of feathers, the strength of wing muscles, the way air could be caught and released, all of these entered human awareness. Not as diagrams but as impressions, gently repeated across countless lives. The science of flight, in a way, began as a quiet practice of watching, of breathing with the sky. Even now, when we step outside and notice a bird overhead, we join in that ancient act. Our eyes follow the smooth arc of motion, our breath slows to its rhythm, and we may feel the same mixture of wonder and calm as those who lived thousands of years before us. The path from bird to rocket may seem long and complex, but it began with something very simple: the quiet gaze upward, the recognition that the sky is not empty but alive with motion. And so, the first observations of birds were not just moments of curiosity. They were seeds planted in the human mind. Seeds of science, seeds of imagination, seeds of longing. They grew slowly, watered by stories, nourished by practice, until one day they would become designs and experiments. But in those early moments, they were enough in themselves, a source of calm, of rhythm, of gentle learning. You may let that thought rest with you, like the softness of wings moving through air, steady, reassuring, eternal. When we think about flight, it is natural to imagine engines, thrust, and modern machines. Yet the story of wings and feathers is much older, rooted in the slow, patient designs of nature. Long before humanity built a single glider or powered airplane, the earth was already filled with creatures whose very bodies embodied the solution. Wings and feathers were not invented in a single moment. They evolved over countless generations, shaped by the rhythm of air and the quiet laws of physics. To observe them closely is to step into a deeper calm, a reminder that what seems miraculous is, in truth, the patient unfolding of structure and function. If you imagine a bird resting on a branch, wings folded, you might not at first see the complexity hidden within. The feathers lie neatly layered, almost like tiles on a roof, smooth and ordered. Yet the moment the bird lifts its wings, you can sense the design. Feathers spread and overlap, creating a surface that is both flexible and strong. This surface, the wing, is shaped not randomly, but with purpose. Its curve, known in science as camber, allows the air to move differently across the top and the bottom. The flow of air creates lift, a gentle upward pull that balances against gravity. Even without equations, you can feel that the shape itself is key. A flat wing would not rise so easily. A curved wing, like those of birds, makes the invisible air into a partner. Feathers are more than decoration. Each one is a tool, with a central shaft and tiny branching filaments. If you have ever picked up a feather and run your fingers along it, you may notice how the barbs and barbules catch together like tiny hooks. This microscopic arrangement allows feathers to form a continuous surface, smooth and sealed against the rush of air. Yet they can also separate when needed, letting air pass through, reducing resistance during the upward stroke of flight. In this way, feathers are both shield and sieve, depending on the moment. Such adaptability is one reason. Birds can fly with efficiency and grace. The wing itself is not only feather, but bone and muscle. The bones are lightweight, often hollow, yet strong enough to bear the stresses of flapping. The muscles, especially the pectorals, are powerful, capable of driving the downbeat that lifts the body into the sky. This balance between strength and lightness is a quiet lesson. Flight demands not only force, but also economy. To rise, one must be strong, but not heavy. To move with air, one must both push and yield. The bird's wing embodies this paradox with calm simplicity. When early humans watched birds, they may not have known these details, but they sensed the outcome. They noticed how the broad wings of an eagle allowed it to soar on thermals, barely moving at all, while the short, rapid wings of a sparrow enabled quick darting through trees. They saw that wing shapes differed according to need. The swallow's long, narrow wings gave it speed and agility in the open sky. The owl's wide, rounded wings allowed silent flight through forests at night. Each form told a story of adaptation, of harmony with a specific environment. Without diagrams, people could still feel the truth. Wings were not all the same, but each was suited to its purpose. The feather itself carried mystery. Soft yet strong, delicate yet durable, it became a symbol in many cultures. Feathers were worn as ornaments, used in ceremonies, placed in crowns and headdresses. To hold a feather was to hold a fragment of flight, a reminder that part of the sky could rest in one's hand. The structure of feathers may not have been studied in detail until much later, but the reverence was already there. Reverence itself is a form of science, for it directs attention. It makes us notice as centuries passed, people began to study feathers more carefully. They discovered that the outer feathers of a wing, called primaries, were the main drivers of thrust, cutting through the air during the downstroke. The inner feathers, the secondaries, provided lift, supporting the bird in gliding. The tail feathers added balance and steering, like the rudder of a ship. Each feather had a role, not random but organized. You may sense the calm elegance of such division, Every part contributing, no part wasted. The texture of feathers also matters. Many birds have contour feathers on their bodies, shaping a smooth outline that reduces drag. Beneath these lie down feathers, soft and insulating, holding warmth close to the skin. This layering shows that flight is never only about movement. It is also about survival, about energy, about comfort. A bird must stay warm even while moving, through cold air. In this way, feathers are both aerodynamic tools and life-preserving blankets. They serve in silence, unnoticed by the bird itself, but essential in every moment. Humans, once they began to design their own machines, often returned to feathers for inspiration. Early gliders sometimes copied the layered structure of wings. The Wright brothers studied how birds angled their wingtips, twisting them slightly to steer. The study of feathers became part of the science of aeronautics, though always translated into materials like wood, fabric, and later metal. Even so, the original source remained the same, the patient design of nature, already refined over millions of years. The beauty of wings and feathers lies not only in their function, but also in their rhythm. Watch a bird beating its wings, and you may notice the alternation between force and rest, downstroke and upstroke. There is effort, then release, power, then ease. This rhythm mirrors the human breath, the balance between inhale and exhale. Perhaps that is why watching flight feels calming. It speaks to a deep pattern already present within us. The wing is not frantic, even when fast. It is steady, repeating, dependable. It teaches that motion and stillness are not opposites, but partners. In larger birds, soaring replaces flapping for long stretches of time. An albatross may glide for hours without moving its wings, letting the air itself do the work. This too is a lesson. Sometimes the greatest efficiency is found in surrender, in trusting the currents that cannot be seen but can be felt. Human flight, too, eventually learned this, designing gliders that use thermals and drafts in ways remarkably similar to birds. In such parallels, we glimpse how much our machines are echoes of wings and feathers. The more we learn, the clearer it becomes that wings and feathers are not only physical structures, but also symbols of balance. Lightness with strength, flexibility with stability, motion with rest. To observe them closely is to notice how opposites can coexist without conflict. The feather does not resist the wind entirely, nor does it yield completely. It meets the air with both firmness and softness, and in that meeting, flight becomes possible. So, when you picture wings and feathers, you might let yourself rest in their calm precision. Each barbule interlocking, each shaft bending but not breaking, each curve shaping the path of air. This is nature's quiet engineering, so refined that it appears effortless. From the stillness of a perched bird to the long glide across the sky, the design is always present, always serving. And for humans, these details were the foundation. To dream of flying was one thing, but to understand how wings and feathers worked was the beginning of true knowledge. Today, when scientists study aerodynamics in wind tunnels, they sometimes return to feathers, testing their patterns and flow. Even in the age of rockets, feathers remain relevant, reminding us that the first flyers solved the problems of air long before we named them. The wisdom of wings is timeless. It carries across centuries, across cultures, across the gentle line between imagination and science. And so, wings and feathers invite us into a calm reflection that the solutions to great challenges often lie quietly around us, waiting to be noticed. They remind us that what seems impossible may only be a matter of design, of patience, of balance. To hold a feather is to hold a story, written not in ink, but in fibers and air. A story that connects earth to sky and humans to the long dream of flight. When we think of flight, our minds often turn to birds or airplanes, yet some of the earliest and most successful flyers on Earth are far smaller. Insects have been taking to the air for more than 300 million years, long before the first bird ever spread its wings. Their story is quiet, almost hidden, yet it carries lessons that humans have drawn upon, even if unconsciously. By watching insects, by noticing their endless variations of motion, people began to sense that the air could be mastered in more than one way. The beating of wings, whether large or small, holds truths that connect across scales of life. Imagine standing in a meadow at dusk when the light is soft and the air still. Around you, insects rise, moths drifting in wide spirals, beetles buzzing. With low vibration, tiny gnats hovering, almost motionless. Each species follows its own rhythm. Each has its own relationship with the air. You may feel that these motions are chaotic, but if you look more carefully, you will notice patterns. The bee beats its wings rapidly, almost blurring to the eye, creating lift not by smooth gliding, but by rapid stirring of air. The dragonfly, with its 2 pairs of wings, moves each set slightly out of phase, giving it the ability to hover, dart forward, or even fly backward. Such diversity shows that flight is not a single solution, but a wide field of possibilities. Early humans, without microscopes or slow-motion cameras, may still have noticed some of these patterns. They saw that insects could rise vertically, could hover above a flower, could maneuver into spaces too tight for birds. The humming of wings became familiar, a background to daily life. That sound was both calming and instructive. It revealed that air could be moved in many ways, and that even the smallest bodies could find a place in the sky. The structure of insect wings is different from that of birds. Feathers are absent. Instead, insects use thin membranes stretched across a framework of veins. These veins provide strength, guiding the flow of air and resisting bending. The surface is often transparent, almost invisible, catching light only at certain angles. To watch a dragonfly's wings is to see an interplay of fragility and power. They seem delicate, yet they carry the insect across lakes and rivers with precision. This paradox, lightness with strength, is a recurring theme in the history of flight. Bees and flies move their wings at astonishing speeds, hundreds of beats per second. Such rapid motion creates vortices, small spirals of air that give extra lift. Scientists only discovered this recently with high-speed imaging, but the insects had been doing it all along. Their method is not about smooth curves and steady glides, but about turbulence, about using the unsteady qualities of air to advantage. This teaches us that flight does not need to be orderly to be effective. Sometimes efficiency lies in the chaotic, the rapid, the barely visible motions that generate stability out of seeming disorder. Humans who observed insects might not have explained these mechanics, but they may have drawn inspiration. In ancient China, for example, the flapping of locust wings was noted in texts. In Japan, dragonflies were celebrated for their speed and agility. Across cultures, insects appeared in art and poetry, not only as symbols of persistence, but also as quiet reminders of the power of wings. By simply watching, people may have learned to respect the air as something alive, filled with currents that even a small creature could navigate. There is also a lesson in scale. Large wings, like those of birds, rely on gliding and smooth flows. Small wings, like those of insects, cannot glide in the same way. Air behaves differently when the scale is tiny. For an insect, moving air feels thick, almost like swimming in syrup. Their wings must push and stir, not simply ride currents. In this, insects teach us that solutions depend on context. There is no single formula for flight, only adaptations that fit the body and the environment. This principle later guided engineers, who realized that helicopters, with their rapid rotor blades, resemble insects more than birds. The buzzing of wings and the whirling of blades share the same rhythm of necessity. Consider the butterfly. Its wings are broad, colorful, and not particularly aerodynamic in the way we think of airplanes. Yet the butterfly moves with grace, not speed. Its flight is irregular, almost drifting, but it serves the purpose: to reach flowers, to evade predators, to travel across meadows. Its beauty lies not in precision, but in variety. From this, humans may have sensed that flight is not only about speed or height, but also about fitting one's needs. The butterfly reminds us that even slow, wandering flight is still flight, still freedom. Dragonflies, on the other hand, reveal mastery. They can hover in place like a hummingbird, surge forward at high speed, or reverse in midair. Their wings, moving independently, allow control in 3 dimensions that few other creatures can match. Observers in ancient times surely noticed this. Perhaps they saw dragonflies skimming over water, never touching the surface, never losing balance. Such sights must have left impressions that lingered, evidence that the air could be shaped with precision, if only one had the right design. The buzzing of bees, too, carries meaning. It signals both labor and community. Each bee's wings beat not for individual flight alone, but for the survival of the hive. Their ability to hover at flowers, to carry pollen, to navigate long distances, all rests on the strength of small wings. To the quiet observer, bees may have offered another lesson: that flight is not only about individual freedom, but also about connection, about sustaining life in a wider cycle. Even the simplest flyers, like flies or mosquitoes, show persistence. They maneuver quickly, evade swats, and maintain balance despite their size. Though often seen as nuisances, their flight displays efficiency unmatched by machines of similar scale. To notice them with patience is to realize that even the smallest lives carry wisdom in their wings. Modern science has confirmed much of what early observers could only guess. Insects generate lift through leading-edge vortices, small whirlwinds, that cling to their wings and keep them aloft. They use resonance, storing energy in elastic tissues, so that each beat of the wing costs less effort. They exploit the physics of unsteady flows, making turbulence into a tool. These discoveries, though technical, remind us of a deeper truth. The solutions to flight have been present for millions of years, carried in fragile bodies, repeating endlessly across meadows and forests. When humans first built machines to fly, they sometimes looked to insects as models. The helicopter, with its spinning blades, echoes the beating of insect wings. Micro-air vehicles today, small drones, often copy the flapping patterns of flies or bees. In this way, insects continue to guide us, not only as sources of wonder, but also as templates for innovation. Perhaps the greatest lesson insects offer is patience. Their flight is not about conquering the sky, but about living within it. They remind us that air is not empty, but textured, filled with currents that can be used if one knows how to move. Their wings show that complexity can arise from simplicity. That strength can reside in fragility, that the sky is open not only to the powerful, but also to the small dot. So, when you think of insects and their flight, you might let your breath slow to their rhythm. Rapid, tiny beats that, taken together, create something steady. Chaotic motions that, seen with calm, reveal order. Their wings have been moving for hundreds of millions of years, carrying them across seasons and continents, whispering quiet truths about adaptation and possibility. To notice them is to join in a long tradition of watching the sky, not only for the soaring of birds, but also for the buzzing of the small, who teach that flight comes in many forms, and that every form carries wisdom. Before the careful study of feathers and wings, before experiments with kites or gliders, humanity carried the idea of flight in its imagination. Long before equations, there were myths, and these myths revealed a longing that was both universal and timeless. To dream of leaving the ground, to rise into the sky, is one of the most persistent themes across cultures. Myths do not describe physics, but they reveal feelings, awe, hope, fear, and desire. They remind us that the path to flight began, not with machines, but with stories, carried gently through generations, like whispered prayers. In ancient Greece, one of the most well-known tales is that of Daedalus and Icarus. Daedalus, a master craftsman, created wings made of feathers and wax, hoping to escape imprisonment. He warned his son Icarus not to fly too close to the sun, yet in the story, Icarus soared upward, carried by exhilaration. The wax melted, the wings failed, and he fell. The tale is often remembered as a warning against ambition, but if you listen softly, you may notice another truth, that even in cautionary form, humans imagine themselves rising. The story holds fear of failure, yes, but also an unquenchable vision of freedom. It shows that the dream of flying was powerful enough to demand expression, even if wrapped in tragedy. Other Greek myths carried similar motifs. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, wore winged sandals. These delicate symbols suggested speed, agility, and the ability to move freely between realms. Even if no human could wear them, the image itself gave comfort. The sky was not only for divine beings, but perhaps one day could be touched by mortals, Tugat in Mesopotamia. Stories spoke of Etana, a king who ascended to the heavens on the back of an eagle. His journey was described not as conquest, but as vision. He rose above the earth to see the world in its fullness, to understand its breadth. This myth connects flight with knowledge, showing that leaving the ground was seen as a path to wider perspective, not only physical, but spiritual. To rise was to see clearly, to gain insight that could not be found among daily tasks. In India, the ancient texts describe the Garuda, a great bird-like being, half man and half eagle. Garuda was strong, swift, and protective, serving as a mount for the god Vishnu. Here, flight symbolized not only freedom, but also guardianship, the ability to protect through vantage and speed. For those who heard the stories, the image of a winged figure was not distant fantasy, but a sign of safety. You may notice how these stories wrapped flight in qualities of reassurance, showing it as a natural extension of what humans already desired: care, vision, protection. Egypt, too, carried bird-like imagery into its mythology. Horus, the falcon-headed god, symbolized both the sky and the act of watching. To see from above was a divine gift, and the falcon's flight was a metaphor for oversight, clarity, and rulership. The Egyptians carved wings into amulets, placed feathers in crowns, and wrapped their art in images of ascent. For them, the sky was not empty, but filled with presence, and wings were a symbol of transition between worlds. Among the Norse, flight appeared in the form of the Valkyries. These figures, often described as moving with wings or swan-like garments, carried the souls of warriors to the afterlife. Their flight was both gentle and solemn, not about escape, but about passage. It reflected a deeper truth. Flight connects worlds. It bridges earth and heaven, life and death. To imagine wings was to imagine crossing boundaries otherwise impossible. In Central America, cultures such as the Maya and Aztec revered Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. This figure united the grounded body of a serpent with the airy freedom of feathers. It represented wisdom and transformation. Again, we find the same pattern. Flight as a symbol of becoming more than one is, of reaching states otherwise out of reach. The serpent that could rise into the air was not ordinary but divine, showing that wings carried not only bodies but meanings. What is striking about all these myths is their calm persistence across distance and time. From Greece to India, from Egypt to the Americas, humans imagined wings. The forms differ: sandals, garments, birds, serpents, but the theme is constant. To rise into the air was not only a dream of movement. It was a dream of freedom, of vision, of connection to something larger. Myths remind us that the longing for flight was not a passing curiosity. It was woven into culture, into ritual, into art. Even in medieval Europe, stories of witches and sorcerers often included flying through the night sky. Though framed as supernatural, these tales reflect the same human fascination. The sky was a space beyond ordinary reach, a realm of possibility, mystery, and power. To imagine someone crossing it was both fearful and alluring. You might notice how myths held both sides of flight, the hope of freedom and the risk of danger. They balanced wonder with caution, showing that the sky was tempting, but not without challenge. Dreams, too, carried flight into the personal realm. Across centuries, people have reported dreams of floating, of gliding, of rising gently above the ground. These are among the most common human dreams, found in cultures far apart, in times long separated. To dream of flight seems to be part of being human. Psychologists today may interpret such dreams as signs of freedom or release. Yet their very universality suggests something deeper, that the desire to rise is not only cultural, but also biological. Rooted in the way we look upward, in the way we sense the openness of the sky. It is important to notice that myths did not always treat flight as conquest. Often it was a gift, a transformation, a passage. It was not about domination, but about perspective. To fly was to see differently, to know more, to be part of something larger. This attitude carries a gentle lesson, that flight is not only about power, but also about vision. The stories remind us that to rise is to expand awareness, to soften boundaries, to feel both awe and humility. For humanity, myths and dreams created a bridge. They kept the idea of flight alive long before it was technically possible. They allowed generations to imagine wings, to visualize movement through air, to hold in their minds the possibility of ascent. Without this imaginative foundation, the later steps, the kites, the gliders, the engines might never have been pursued. Imagination prepares the ground for science. Dreams make space for questions. Stories carry desires forward until methods arrive. So when you hear of Icarus or Garuda, of Horus or Quetzalcoatl, you may feel the calm continuity of human longing. Each story is a variation on a single theme, the wish to rise. Whether carried by sandals, by eagles, by swan garments, or by serpents with feathers, the message is the same. The sky is not closed. The boundary is not final. With wings, one can move beyond. Even now, in the modern world of jets and rockets, the old myths remain. They remind us that flight is not only technical, but also symbolic. Every airplane that lifts off, every spacecraft that leaves the atmosphere, carries within it echoes of those early stories. They are not replaced by science. They are joined with it as background music joins the foreground. To fly is to fulfill a dream much older than machines, a dream whispered in myths and carried in sleep. And so, myths and dreams of flight invite us into gentle reflection. They show us that the longing to rise is not reckless, but deeply human. They remind us that before flight became science, it was already a form of poetry, carried softly in imagination. The stories do not need to be true in detail, for there. Truth lies elsewhere, in showing that the human mind has always been drawn upward, seeking rhythm with the sky. In listening to them, you may let yourself feel that same pull, not as urgency, but as quiet wonder. When the Renaissance unfolded in Europe, it brought with it a new way of seeing. Art and science were no longer kept apart, but allowed to meet in the mind of a single person. Few embodied this union more fully than Leonardo da Vinci, known as an artist, an engineer, and a thinker. He was also one of the first to take the dream of flight from myth into careful study. His sketches of wings, machines, and gliders were not flights of fantasy alone. They were the first attempts to bring the laws of nature, as he observed them, into a language of design. Leonardo's notebooks are filled with images of birds. He drew them with precision, showing not only their outer form, but also the way their wings moved in stages. He wrote long notes about air currents, about the importance of balance, about the difference between the downstroke and the upstroke. His approach was slow, patient, like the rhythm of breathing. He did not demand immediate answers. Instead, he looked carefully, again and again, letting the motion of birds become lessons for his hand and his mind. Among his many designs was the ornithopter, a machine with wings meant to flap like those of birds. It never flew, but in the attempt, Leonardo revealed an essential truth, that human muscles are not strong enough to sustain such movement. He sensed this limitation, noting that a person's strength could not be compared to that of a bird whose entire body was designed for flight. Yet even in failure, his design taught. It showed that imitation of nature must be joined with adaptation. To fly as birds do was not possible for humans, but to learn from birds was necessary. He also sketched what has come to be known as the aerial screw, a device shaped like a spiral, intended to rise by pushing against the air. Though it, too, was never built successfully, its form is striking. Modern viewers recognize in it a distant ancestor of the helicopter. The idea of twisting through air, of lifting by rotation, was far ahead of its time. Leonardo may not have had the materials or engines to make it real, but his mind opened a door that centuries later others would walk through. In his notebooks, Leonardo wrote, "Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." These words, whether precisely his or later attributed to him, capture the calm persistence of his vision. Flight for him was not only a technical challenge, but also a poetic state. He saw the freedom of birds and wished to share it, not in myth, but in structure, in mechanics, in real attempts. He studied the anatomy of birds with the same care he gave to human muscles. He dissected wings, measured angles, noted the layering of feathers. His drawings show the curve of the wing, the way air passes above and below, creating lift. He sensed, long before modern science confirmed it, that the shape of the wing mattered, more than force alone. This insight, quiet but profound, became the foundation of aerodynamics. Leonardo may not have built a working airplane, but his mind rested on the same principles that would one day carry jets across oceans. It is calming to remember that. Leonardo worked mostly in solitude, filling page after page with sketches that, would not be published in his lifetime. His notes remained private, his machines unbuilt, yet the act itself mattered. To draw is to think. To write is to preserve. Even if the world did not yet fly, he kept the dream alive, shaped into forms that could later be rediscovered. The rhythm of his pen across paper was like the beating of wings, steady, deliberate, full of potential. Leonardo also considered the role of air. He wrote about currents, about the invisible streams that carry birds upward. He imagined hillsides where gliders could launch, using the wind itself as a partner. These reflections reveal that he was not limited to mechanics alone. He was also attentive to environment. Flight was not only about machines, but also about harmony with the atmosphere. The air was not empty space, but a medium, a field of motion. To sense this truth in the 15th century was extraordinary. Some of his sketches show parachutes, triangular canopies meant to slow descent. These were not about rising, but about safety, about gentleness. Even in dreaming of ascent, Leonardo considered the possibility of falling, and he sought ways to soften it. Here again we see balance, ambition paired with caution, imagination joined with care. In this, his work resembles the myths of earlier centuries, where flight carried both hope and risk. Leonardo's difference was that he looked for technical answers to balance the two. Though none of his flying machines succeeded, the calm persistence of his work left a legacy. Later inventors could look back at his notebooks and see both inspiration and warning. They saw that imitation of birds was tempting but limited, that mechanical advantage was required, that understanding air was as important as building wings. Leonardo's failures were not empty. They were guideposts, quiet markers pointing toward the directions that would eventually bear fruit. His way of thinking reminds us that the path to achievement is not always direct. Sometimes the first steps are sketches, not solutions. Sometimes the work is less about immediate success and more about shaping the imagination of the future. Leonardo gave to flight a language of diagrams, a carefulness of observation, a seriousness of purpose. He lifted the idea from myth into experiment, from dream into design. To reflect on Leonardo's sketches today is to see both fragility and strength. Fragility, because his machines never left the ground. Strength, because his mind reached far ahead of his time. His notes hold the rhythm of curiosity, the patience of study, the calm insistence that flight could be approached with reason. In this, he stands as a bridge between myth and modernity, between dream and science. And so, Leonardo da Vinci's flight sketches invite us to breathe slowly, to remember that even unrealized efforts have meaning. They remind us that knowledge is often built in layers, like feathers upon a wing, each supporting the next. His work did not carry bodies into the sky, but it carried minds, setting them on paths that would one day succeed. In his quiet notebooks, the dream of flight took its first structured form, and from those pages, a long journey toward airplanes and rockets began. By the 18th century, the human dream of flight had already lived for thousands of years in stories, sketches, and quiet hopes. But until that time, no person had left the ground in a sustained, controlled way. The skies belonged to birds, and insects to myths and imagination. Then, in a small French town, two brothers turned their attention not to wings or feathers, but to something more subtle, the nature of air itself, and how it changes with heat. Their names were Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier, and their work would open a new chapter in the history of flight. The brothers were papermakers by trade, familiar with light materials and delicate textures. In their workshops, they noticed how hot air rises, Some stories suggest that one of them observed sparks and smoke lifting embers up a chimney. Others describe how they experimented by holding small bags of cloth over a fire, watching them billow and drift. The exact origin may not matter. What matters is that they sensed a quiet truth. Heated air is lighter than cooler air around it, and if contained, it can lift objects upward. It was a principle both simple and profound, visible to anyone who had watched smoke curl into the sky. Yet only the Montgolfiers thought to build upon it. Their first experiments were modest. Small balloons made of paper and fabric floated gently into the air, to the delight of those who saw them. But the brothers were not satisfied with toys. They believed the principle could be extended, that with larger envelopes of fabric, even people could be lifted. It was a bold thought, but approached with patience. They built larger balloons, coated them with a mixture to make them more airtight and resistant to flame. Slowly, carefully, they tested again and again, letting each trial teach them more. In June of 1783, in the town of Anagni, they presented their invention to the public. A large balloon, nearly 11 meters in diameter, rose above the crowd. Filled with hot smoke from a fire, it lifted skyward for 10 minutes, climbing more than a kilometer high. The people below were astonished. For the first time in recorded history, humans had built a device that carried weight into the sky, not as myth, not as dream, but as reality. The quiet truth of heated air had been transformed into the first working flying machine. Later that same year, in Paris, they prepared for an even greater demonstration, carrying living beings. At that time, it was uncertain whether the upper air could sustain life. People wondered if altitude itself might be harmful, if the thinness of air or strange conditions above the ground might prove dangerous. To test this, the Montgolfiers placed a sheep, a duck, and a rooster in a basket beneath their balloon. Before an audience that included King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the balloon rose into the air, carrying its animal passengers. After a short flight, it landed safely. The animals were unharmed, proving that ascent was possible and survivable. Encouraged, the brothers moved toward human flight. In November of 1783, the first untethered balloon flight took place. Two men, Jean-Francois Pilater de Rosier and Francois Laurent Darlans, stepped into the basket beneath a Montgolfier balloon. With fire heating the air above them, they rose quietly into the sky of Paris. The flight lasted about 25 minutes and covered nearly 9 kilometers. People watched in wonder as, for the first time, humans moved freely through the air, supported not by wings, but by the simple principle of heated air rising. The scene must have been deeply moving. Unlike the roar of modern engines, the balloon rose almost silently, drifting with the breeze. From the ground, it looked serene, like a great sphere floating on invisible water. For those inside, the view would have been unlike anything they had ever seen. Rooftops and fields spread out below, the horizon stretching wider than from any hill. It was not speed that impressed, but perspective. The balloon revealed that the sky was not closed, but open to those who dared to rise gently into it. The Montgolfier flights captured the imagination of Europe. Within months, balloons appeared in England, Italy, and beyond. Some were used for spectacle, others for scientific study. Experiments with altitude, temperature, and air pressure soon followed. For the first time, humans could measure the atmosphere from within it. The sky became a place not only of wonder, but also of knowledge. Yet the flights also revealed limitations. Balloons could not be steered easily. They moved with the wind, drifting where currents carried them. Heat had to be maintained with constant Attention, feeding the fire, keeping the air within warm enough to sustain lift. Landings were uncertain, sometimes gentle, sometimes rough. Still, the principle was sound, and the experience unforgettable. It is calming to notice that the first true human flight did not come from engines or heavy machines, but from something as gentle as warm air. The Montgolfier balloons were fragile, made of fabric and paper, held together by seams and ropes. They did not conquer the sky with force, but entered it with softness. Their ascent was slow, their motion calm, their presence almost dreamlike. They remind us that the beginnings of great changes are often quiet, carried by simple principles observed with care. The balloon opened not only a new technology, but also a new feeling. For the first time, people could see their world from above, as birds had always seen it. The sense of perspective was profound. Cities, rivers, forests, all appeared as patterns, as if stitched into a larger fabric. The view was both humbling and inspiring. Many who experienced it spoke of awe, of peace, of a shift in how they understood their place on Earth. In time, balloons would serve in exploration, carrying observers to higher altitudes, into the edges of weather and climate. They would serve in communication, in war, in science. But their first role was to awaken imagination in a new way. They proved that flight was not impossible, that the sky could hold more than birds. They invited humanity to look upward, not only with longing, but with confidence. The Montgolfier brothers could not have known all that would follow. Airplanes, rockets, spacecraft, yet their balloons marked the turning point. The boundary between Earth and sky had been crossed, not in myth but in lived reality. Their flights showed that careful observation of natural principles, joined with patience and courage, could make dreams into truth. And so, the story of hot air balloons carries a quiet lesson. It tells us that flight began not with noise, but with silence, not with speed, but with drifting, not with power, but with warmth. The Montgolfiers, working with paper and fire, brought humanity into the sky for the first time. Their gift was not only a machine, but an experience. The calm rising above the ground, the gentle motion with the wind, the view that expands the mind. It was the beginning of flight as we know it, and it began with nothing more than heated air filling a fragile sphere, carrying with it the ancient human dream. When the Montgolfier balloons first rose into the sky, they awakened a new certainty. Human beings could leave the ground. Yet the wonder of those early flights was joined by a limitation. Balloons drifted with the wind. They could not be steered or guided. To ascend was easy. To remain aloft was possible, but to choose a direction was another matter entirely. For a time, people accepted this. To float freely was miracle enough. But as imagination matured, a question began to surface. Could flight become not only possible, but purposeful? Could humans not only rise, but also navigate? This question gave birth to the first airships, balloons given shape, engines and rudders transformed into vessels that could be directed across the sky. The term dirigible itself comes from the Latin dirigere, meaning to steer. It reflects the new ambition, not simply to float, but to travel, to cross distances. With intention. The first steps were modest. In 1785, only 2 years after the Montgolfier flights, a Frenchman named Jean-Pierre Blanchard attached a hand-powered propeller to a balloon. He hoped to guide his motion with muscle power, pedaling as if on a bicycle. The effort showed more courage than effectiveness, but it planted the idea. If air could carry us, perhaps we could also guide ourselves within it. Throughout the 19th century, inventors across Europe experimented with ways to steer balloons. They added oars, wings, propellers, even bird-like flapping mechanisms. Many of these contractions were heavy, awkward, and unsuccessful. Yet they reflected persistence, the calm rhythm of trial and error. Flight was no longer only a dream, it was a field experiment. Each attempt, even when it failed, carried forward the knowledge that air could be shaped, that lift was only one part of the problem. Direction and stability were equally essential. One of the earliest successful steps came from Henry Giffard, a French engineer. In 1852, he built a cigar-shaped airship powered by a small steam engine. The craft was 44 meters long, with a 3-horsepower motor driving a propeller. It could not fly against strong winds, but it could be steered gently, turning left or right, adjusting altitude with purpose. On its first flight from Paris, Giffard traveled nearly 30 kilometers. For the first time, a human moved through the sky, not only carried but guided. The moment was quiet, but profound. Air had become a navigable space dot as the century turned. Airships grew larger and more sophisticated. A great innovation was to replace steam with lighter engines and to use hydrogen or later helium for lift. The elongated, rigid frame of some airships allowed for greater control and stability. These became the dirigibles, the precursors to the giants that would dominate early 20th century skies. To watch one rise must have been breathtaking. Immense, silent, shimmering in sunlight, moving slowly but with intention. They seemed like floating cities, calm in their grandeur, serene as they crossed landscapes. The most famous name associated with this era is Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin. In Germany, at the dawn of the 1900s, he developed rigid airships supported by internal frameworks of aluminum. These Zeppelins became symbols of modernity, carrying passengers, delivering mail, even serving in wartime. They offered something no balloon could: reliability, range, and the possibility of schedules. To board a Zeppelin was to step into the future, into a cabin that drifted above rivers and mountains, offering views never before possible to ordinary travelers. Yet the pace of airships was unhurried. They moved slowly, rarely faster than a train. Their strength was not speed, but endurance. A Zeppelin could travel for days, carrying people in quiet comfort. Meals were served, windows offered vast horizons, and the motion was gentle, almost like sailing on calm seas. In this way, airships extended the soothing quality of the balloon while adding direction and purpose. They were, in many ways, the calmest form of powered flight humanity has ever known. Still, limitations remained. Airships depended on gases lighter than air, and hydrogen, though abundant, was dangerously flammable. Several disasters reminded the world of this risk, the most famous being the Hindenburg in 1937. Yet even before such tragedies, airships carried with them an inherent vulnerability. Strong winds could push them off course. Storms could endanger them. They were large, costly, and difficult to maintain. Their serenity was real, but it came with fragility. The age of the airship was brief, overshadowed by the rise of heavier-than-air machines, airplanes that could move faster, higher, and with greater reliability. But the importance of airships lies not in their duration, but in their role as a bridge. They carried the dream of flight from drifting balloons into directed travel. They taught lessons about engines, navigation, materials, and safety. They offered humans their first true experience of aerial journey, not only rising, but going. Somewhere to reflect on them now is to sense a kind of nostalgia. Photographs of Zeppelins floating over cities capture a quiet grandeur, a serenity unmatched by today's machines. They remind us that progress is not always about speed. Sometimes it is about perspective, about the calm expansion of what is possible. Airships showed that the sky could be a pathway, not just an open space. They gave us the first taste of controlled flight, and in doing so, they prepared the way for airplanes, rockets, and beyond. The lesson of airships is gentle but enduring. They remind us that control does not need to be forceful. Sometimes it is enough to shape direction slowly, to move with patience, to trust in gradual progress. The dirigible was not the final answer to flight, but it was a necessary step, a reminder that the path to mastery is gradual, that each stage carries value, that even fragile successes can prepare the way for stronger ones. So when you imagine the first airships drifting across a dawn sky, you might let yourself feel the calm they carried. Their vast bodies moved almost silently, casting long shadows on the ground below. For those who watched, they must have seemed both miraculous and reassuring, proof that humans had not only entered the sky, but begun to navigate it. Their era may have passed, but their lesson remains. The sky is not only a place of freedom, but also of direction, and the journey toward unfolds step by gentle step. At the dawn of the 20th century, flight had already taken many forms. Balloons had risen into the air, drifting with the wind. Airships had added control, moving slowly but intentionally across landscapes. Yet the dream of true, powered flight, a machine heavier than air, rising from the ground under its own strength, controlled and sustained, remained unfulfilled. Many had tried, many had failed. But in a small bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, two brothers quietly prepared to make history. Their names were Orville and Wilbur Wright. The Wright brothers were not aristocrats, not wealthy inventors with vast resources. They were mechanics, builders, thinkers who combined practical skill with patient curiosity. They had grown up fascinated by flight, inspired by a small toy helicopter powered by rubber bands that their father had given them as children. That toy, spinning and lifting into the air, left a lasting impression. It showed that flight was possible on a small scale, and if possible in miniature, perhaps also possible in larger form. Unlike some dreamers of the past, the Wrights did not leap immediately into grand machines. They began with careful study. They read about earlier attempts, about gliders, about the experiments of Otto Lilienthal in Germany, who had launched himself from hillsides in winged craft. Lilienthal's flights had ended in tragedy, but his notes and data offered valuable lessons. The Wrights absorbed them, but they did not stop there. They decided to test for themselves, to measure, to build, to fail, and to try again. In the late 1890s, they began constructing their own gliders. They traveled to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, a place chosen for its steady winds and open sands. There, in isolation, they launched their first experiments. The gliders were simple, made of wood and fabric, but each carried refinements. The brothers watched carefully, noting how air moved across wings, how balance was achieved, how control could be gained. They observed birds as well, noticing how they shifted their wing tips to steer. From this, the Wrights developed the idea of wing warping, twisting the wings slightly to maintain balance and direction. It was a simple insight, but revolutionary. By 1902, they had built a glider that could truly be controlled. It had elevators at the front to guide pitch, wing warping for roll, and a rudder at the back for yaw. Together, these formed the three axes of control: up and down, side to side, and turning. Modern airplanes still use the same principles today, though with more advanced mechanisms. The Wrights had discovered that flight was not only about lift, but also about balance, about harmony in 3 dimensions. The final step was power. To remain aloft without wind, the craft would need an engine, light but strong. At the time, no commercial engine fit the requirement. So the brothers designed their own. With the help of their mechanic, Charlie Taylor, they built a small gasoline engine weighing less than 200 pounds, producing about 12 horsepower. It was simple, but it worked. They mounted it on their latest glider, attaching 2 wooden propellers, driven by chains. The airplane, which they called the Flyer, was ready. On December 17, 1903, on the windswept sands of Kitty Hawk, the moment arrived. The brothers took turns piloting. At 10:35 in the morning, Orville lay on the machine, started the engine, and released the craft. The Flyer moved forward along its rail, lifted into the air, and stayed aloft for 12 seconds, traveling 36 meters. It was not long, not far, but it was history's first controlled, sustained, powered flight of a heavier-than-air machine. 3 more flights followed that day, the longest lasting 59 seconds, covering 260 meters. With each attempt, the brothers proved that their invention worked. Humanity had entered a new age. To imagine the scene is to picture something humble rather than dramatic. The Flyer was fragile, covered in fabric, its frame thin and exposed. The wind was cold, the sand soft beneath their feet. There were only a handful of witnesses, including lifeguards from the nearby station. No great crowds, no fanfare, just the quiet persistence of 2 brothers realizing a dream centuries old. The airplane lifted not with spectacle, but with simplicity, as if whispering into the air rather than shouting. What made the Wright brothers succeed where so many had failed was not luck, but method. They built wind tunnels to test wind shapes, measuring lift with homemade balances. They experimented with dozens of designs, refining each one. They accepted failure as part of the process, letting each mistake become a teacher. Their background in bicycles helped too, for they understood balance, control, and the value of light, strong frames. They combined observation, mathematics, and hands-on building into a rhythm of progress. Their achievement was not immediately recognized. For several years, newspapers and even some scientific institutions doubted the reports. But the truth spread, and soon demonstrations in the United States and Europe silenced doubt. By 1908, the Wrights were performing long, controlled flights before thousands of spectators. Airplanes quickly became symbols of a new century, a century of movement, speed, and global connection. Yet, in reflecting on that first flight, what stands out is not the noise of progress, but the calmness of persistence. The Wright brothers did not rush. They built slowly, tested patiently, trusted in careful measurement. Their success came not from grand visions alone, but from steady, deliberate work. In this, they remind us that great changes often begin in quiet, in small shops, in lonely fields, in unnoticed experiments. The Flyer itself was modest, but its legacy immense. Every airplane today carries its DNA. Wings shaped for lift, engines for thrust, control surfaces for balance. The principles discovered at Kitty Hawk remain unchanged, even as machines now cross oceans and enter space. The Wrights had unlocked the secret not only of rising, but of sustaining and guiding. They had given humanity wings of its own design, not so. The story of the Wright brothers invites us into a calm reflection. It tells us that flight was not achieved in a single leap, but in countless small steps, guided by patience and curiosity. It reminds us that even fragile beginnings can grow into enduring realities. And it shows that the dream of centuries, to rise from the ground under our own power, was fulfilled not by myth, not by magic, but by quiet observation, careful building, and trust in the invisible rhythm of air. When the Wright brothers first lifted their fragile machine into the sky, they proved that powered, controlled flight was possible. Yet their flyer was not the end of discovery. It was the beginning of a new science. To fly farther, faster, and more safely, people needed to understand the invisible partner of every airplane, the air itself. This study became known as aerodynamics, the science of how air moves around objects and how shapes can use that movement to create lift, reduce drag, and maintain stability. The roots of aerodynamics stretch back centuries. Even in ancient Greece, philosophers like Aristotle wondered about the motion of air and the lift of birds. In the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci drew sketches of wing shapes and speculated about currents and pressures. Yet these early thoughts were mostly qualitative, ideas expressed in words and drawings without precise measurement. It was not until the 17th and 18th centuries that physics and mathematics began to provide a framework. One of the first major contributions came from Isaac Newton. In his Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, he described laws of motion that applied not only to falling apples and planets, but also to objects moving through fluids like air. He imagined particles of air striking a surface, transferring momentum. Though his model was too simple to explain lift fully, it laid a foundation. Flight is about forces, about interactions between bodies and the medium around them. Later, in the 18th century, Daniel Bernoulli offered another insight. His principle, published in 1738, described how the pressure of a fluid decreases as its speed increases. This idea would become central to explaining why a wing curved on top and flatter on the bottom can generate lift. Faster airflow over the top means lower pressure, creating an upward force. Though simplified in textbooks, the principle remains one of the cornerstones of aerodynamics. Still, the science was not straightforward. Air is invisible, and its motion complex. The flow of air can be smooth, called laminar, or chaotic, called turbulent. It can separate from surfaces, form vortices, and shift in ways difficult to predict. For centuries, progress was slow. Inventors built models, tested them in the open, and learned mostly by trial and error. Many failures, many crashes were the price of incomplete knowledge. In the 19th century, systematic experiments began. Sir George Cayley in England built gliders and carefully measured their performance. He is sometimes called the father of aeronautics because he identified the four forces of flight: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. His diagram showed that wings provide lift, engines provide thrust, gravity pulls downward, and air resistance slows motion. To balance these forces was the secret of flight. Cayley's work moved the subject from dream to science, giving later inventors a clear path. Another step came with Francis Wenham and the Aeronautical Society of Great Britain. In the 1870s, Wenham built one of the first wind tunnels, controlled, spaces where air could be moved across models, allowing systematic testing of shapes. By observing lift and drag directly, experimenters could refine designs without risking lives in actual flight. The wind tunnel became a quiet but powerful tool, a laboratory for the invisible. Otto Lilienthal in Germany added to this progress. In the 1890s, he built gliders and launched himself repeatedly from hills, recording data on lift and wing shape. He believed that controlled, repeated experiments were the path forward. His flights were graceful but risky, and in 1896 he died in a crash. Yet his data, published widely, inspired the Wright brothers and others. His legacy was not his machines, but his numbers, his careful attempts to measure what the air was doing. The Wrights themselves contributed to aerodynamics. Unsatisfied with published data, they built their own small wind tunnel in 1901. Inside, they tested dozens of wing designs, measuring lift with balances they crafted themselves. Their discoveries corrected earlier errors and gave them the confidence to build the flyer. In this way, the first powered flight was not only a triumph of engineering, but also a triumph of careful aerodynamic study. In the 20th century, aerodynamics blossomed into a full science. With the rise of universities, laboratories, and governments investing in aviation, the study of airflow became rigorous. Mathematicians developed equations, engineers built larger wind tunnels, and physicists refined the understanding of turbulence. Ludwig Prandtl in Germany introduced the concept of the boundary layer, the thin sheet of air that clings to a surface and governs how flow separates. This insight explained why wings stall and why streamlining matters. Prandtl's work remains foundational to modern aerodynamics. During both world wars, the need for faster, more efficient airplanes accelerated progress. Wings were reshaped, fuselages streamlined, propellers refined. Engineers learned to reduce drag, to delay flow separation, to use flaps and slats for extra lift. Jet engines added new challenges, pushing speeds close to and beyond the speed of sound. Aerodynamics expanded to include compressibility, shock waves, and supersonic flow. The science of invisible currents became a discipline of precision, tested with equations, wind tunnels, and eventually computers. Even with technology, the essence of aerodynamics remains calm, to study how shapes meet air, to understand the rhythm of flow. A bird's wing and a jet's wing obey the same principles, though on different scales. Lift arises from differences in pressure, drag resists motion, vortices form and shed, balance is maintained through surfaces that guide. These truths are timeless, embedded in the air itself. What aerodynamics reveals is that flight is not about conquering the sky, but about harmony with it. The air is not an obstacle to be crushed, but a partner to be understood. Every curve of a wing, every contour of a fuselage, is shaped to invite the air into cooperation. The smoother the dialogue between object and flow, the more efficient the flight. In this, science returns to the same lesson nature had already shown, that flight depends on balance, on patience, on listening to what the invisible currents allow. Today, aerodynamic study continues with computational fluid dynamics, simulating billions of particles of air across virtual wings. Yet even the most advanced models remain guided by the same quiet principles observed centuries ago. Newton's forces, Bernoulli's pressures, Prandtl's boundary layers, these remain as steady anchors. The field grows more detailed, but its foundation is the same, a calm study of motion in air. So, when we reflect on the development of aerodynamics, we see not only equations and experiments, but also continuity. The path from Aristotle's questions to the Wright's wind tunnel to modern supercomputers is long, but its rhythm is steady. Each generation looked at the same invisible partner, the air, and asked how to understand it better. Each step brought greater safety, greater range, greater possibility. And perhaps the most gentle lesson of aerodynamics is this: that progress often comes not from sudden leaps, but from patient refinement. Flight became possible, not because one person discovered a secret, but because many observed, measured, adjusted, and shared. The sky opened not in a single day, but across centuries of calm study. Air remains invisible, But its truths are now visible in every airplane, every glider, every rocket. Aerodynamics transformed longing into knowledge, and knowledge into wings. When the Wright brothers' flyer lifted from the sands of Kitty Hawk in 1903, it stayed aloft for less than a minute. It was fragile, slow, and limited. Yet within a few decades, airplanes had transformed the world. They grew from experimental gliders into machines that served in war, carried passengers, delivered mail, and crossed oceans. The journey from biplanes to jets is not only a story of technology, but also of human intention. Flight became both a tool of destruction and a bridge of connection, showing that every invention reflects the choices of those who use it. The earliest airplanes of the 1910s were simple biplanes, machines with two sets of wings stacked above one another. This design gave extra lift and stability at low speeds, though it added drag. Pilots sat in open cockpits, exposed to wind and weather, engines roaring loudly in front of them. These planes were not fast, rarely exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, but they carried the exhilaration of new possibility. They delivered mail between towns, performed stunts at fairs, and slowly began to weave flight into daily life. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, airplanes suddenly took on a different role. At first, they were used for reconnaissance, to see enemy positions from above. The advantage was immediate, a bird's-eye view of the battlefield. But soon, weapons were mounted, and the first dogfights began. Pilots became known as aces, and the airplane was no longer only a symbol of freedom, but also a weapon. The fragile biplane was pressed into service, its fabric wings carrying both observation and destruction. The war accelerated technology. Engines grew stronger, designs more refined. By 1918, airplanes could fly higher, faster, and farther than only a few years before. Yet even then, they remained vulnerable. Wood and canvas frames, easily damaged, dependent on favorable weather. Still, the idea of air power had taken root, and it would never fade. After the war, many pilots returned to civilian life. Some performed daring stunts in barnstorming shows, looping and diving before amazed crowds. Others joined early airlines, flying small groups of passengers between cities. The 1920s and 1930s saw rapid growth in civilian aviation. Metal replaced wood, enclosed cabins replaced open cockpits, and planes became safer and more reliable. Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic in 1927 captured the imagination of millions, proving that airplanes could link continents. Air travel slowly shifted from novelty to service. Airlines expanded routes, carrying passengers and mail with increasing efficiency. By the late 1930s, large aircraft like the Douglas DC-3 offered comfort, speed, and reliability. The airplane had become not only a machine of adventure, but also a practical tool, shrinking distances between nations. At the same time, military interest in aviation deepened. World War II brought an explosion of innovation. Fighters and bombers became faster, larger, and more powerful. The skies over Europe and the Pacific filled with aircraft, Spitfires, Messerschmitts, Mustangs, Zeros, B-17s, Lancasters. Each reflected different philosophies of design. Each served roles of attack, defense, or transport. The airplane had become central to warfare, a decisive factor in battles and strategies. Among the most significant advances was the shift from propellers to jets. In the 1930s, engineers in Germany and Britain began experimenting with turbojet engines, which compressed air and ignited fuel to produce continuous thrust. Unlike propellers, which pushed against the air, jets accelerated it through turbines, allowing much higher speeds. The first jet fighters appeared at the end of World War II, such as the German Messerschmitt Me 262. Though introduced too late to change the war's outcome, they demonstrated a new era. The future of flight would be jet-powered. After the war, jet technology spread rapidly into both military and civilian aviation. The 1950s and 1960s became decades of transformation. Military jets reached supersonic speeds, breaking the sound barrier with a thunderous boom. Civilian jets, such as the Boeing 707, opened the skies to mass air travel. Flights that once took days by ship now took hours by air. For the first time, ordinary people could cross oceans within a single day. The world felt smaller, more connected. The contrast between military and civilian uses of airplanes grew sharper. On one hand, jets became tools of deterrence and conflict, capable of carrying weapons with unprecedented speed. On the other hand, they became carriers of peace, commerce, and family, reuniting people across continents. The same technology that delivered bombs also delivered letters, goods, and travelers. Airplanes showed clearly that science itself is neutral. It is human choice that shapes its meaning. The shift from biplanes to jets also changed how people experienced flight. The open cockpit gave way to pressurized cabins, where passengers could sit in relative comfort, shielded from wind and weather. The roar of engines became steady background noise, while meals were served and windows framed views of clouds. What had once been daring adventure became routine travel. To board a jetliner was to step into the rhythm of modern life, to join in a flow of motion that circled the globe. Technically, aerodynamics advanced as well. Swept wings, jet intakes, high bypass turbofan engines. Each refinement allowed greater efficiency, longer range, quieter rides. Engineers learned to design for both lift and speed, to balance comfort with performance. Airports grew as well, becoming hubs of movement, linking cities into networks of connection. The jet age was not only about machines, but also about infrastructure, about building a world shaped by flight. It is calming to notice how gradual this transformation was. The distance from the Wright flyer to the Boeing 707 is only about 50 years, yet the path was built step by step, each generation refining what came before. Fragile biplanes of canvas and wood gave way to sturdy monoplanes of metal, bento, sleek jets of aluminum and titanium. Each stage carried lessons, each built upon earlier failures and successes. The story of airplanes between the wars and beyond shows both the shadow and the light of human ingenuity. Flight could destroy, but it could also connect. It could divide through conflict, but also unite through travel. It became part of both fear and comfort. In this way, airplanes mirror humanity itself, capable of harm, capable of care. Never only one or the other. Today, when we step onto a jetliner, we rarely think of the fragile biplanes that came before. Yet the same forces of lift, drag, thrust, and weight still guide our journey. The lineage is unbroken, stretching from fabric wings over muddy battlefields to polished fuselages gliding at cruising altitude. To fly in a jet is to join that history, to ride upon the same principles first discovered by observation of birds and later refined through centuries of study. So, the evolution from biplanes to jets carries a gentle reminder. It tells us that progress is not sudden, but layered. Each design, each flight, each experiment added to the whole. The airplane is not only a machine, but a story of patience, of persistence, of choices made between war and peace, between destruction and Connection. To reflect on it is to breathe with the rhythm of history, to sense both the fragility of beginnings and the strength of what has grown from them. When propeller-driven airplanes carried humanity into the sky in the early 20th century, they opened a new world. Yet even as they grew larger, faster, and more reliable, their limits soon became clear. Propellers could only turn so fast. Before efficiency fell away, air resistance grew with speed, and drag became a wall that propeller aircraft could not easily break. The dream of going faster, climbing higher, and covering greater distances called for a new solution. That solution was the jet engine. The idea of jet propulsion was not entirely new. The principle is ancient. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This law, written by Newton in the 17th century, describes how rockets move, expelling gases backward to push forward. The same principle guides a jet engine, but with continuous power, fed by air drawn in, compressed, mixed with fuel, and ignited in a steady rhythm. The exhaust rushes backward, the plane moves forward. Simple in concept, powerful in reality. In the 1930s, engineers in different countries began to imagine how this principle could be applied to airplanes. In Britain, Frank Whittle worked on designs for a turbojet, facing skepticism and scarce funding, but persisting nonetheless. In Germany, Hans von Ohain developed a similar concept, leading to the first jet-powered flights. Their work was parallel, each guided by the same quiet truth, that the propeller, though effective, was only the beginning. To go beyond, air itself must be swallowed and transformed within the machine. The first operational jet aircraft appeared during World War II. Germany's Messerschmitt Me 262, sleek and fast, could outpace any Allied fighter. Britain's Gloucester Meteor followed, adding its own presence to the skies. These jets were extraordinary, but they came too late to change the war's outcome. Still, they signaled a future that could not be ignored. The age of jets had begun. After the war, jet engines spread quickly into military aviation. Fighters that once flew at 500 kilometers per hour now reached 900, then 1,200, and eventually broke the sound barrier. In 1947, Chuck Yeager, flying the Bell X-1, became the first person to exceed Mach 1, the speed of sound. The event marked a threshold. The sky, once a gentle medium, now revealed new mysteries: shock waves, sonic booms, compressibility. Engineers adapted, shaping wings into swept-back forms, refining materials, and studying airflow at extreme speeds. The pursuit of speed became both scientific and symbolic, showing that humanity was no longer confined by the old limits. Jet engines did more than transform military power. They also reshaped civilian life. In 1952, the de Havilland Comet became the first commercial jetliner, offering smooth, fast travel. Though early problems with metal fatigue led to tragedy, the concept proved sound. Soon after, the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8 brought jet travel into the mainstream. Crossing the Atlantic, once a long ocean voyage, became a matter of hours. Cities across continents grew closer, families reunited more easily, cultures intertwined. The jet engine turned the world into a smaller, more connected place. Passengers noticed the difference. Jetliners flew higher, above much of the turbulence and weather that troubled propeller planes. The cabins were quieter, the rides smoother. Flight that had once been an adventure, noisy and uncertain, became comfortable and routine. Businessmen could cross oceans in a single day. Families could migrate and still return to visit. Tourism expanded, trade accelerated, diplomacy changed. The jet engine was not only a machine, it was a bridge, shortening the space between lives. Technically, jet engines came in several forms. The simplest was the turbojet, compressing air and expelling it directly. More efficient for passenger use was the turbofan, where some of the air bypassed the combustion chamber, creating extra thrust with less noise and fuel consumption. Turboprops combined jet principles with propellers, offering efficiency at lower speeds. Each design reflected a balance between speed, range, and purpose. Yet all shared the same foundation: the steady rhythm of intake, compression, ignition, and exhaust. As jets grew faster, new challenges appeared. Supersonic flight required new materials to withstand heat from friction. The Concorde, developed jointly by Britain and France, became the most famous supersonic passenger jet. First flown in 1969, it carried travelers across the Atlantic in less than 4 hours, cruising at twice the speed of sound. For those who boarded, the experience was unique, not only speed, but elegance. Windows framed the curve of the earth, meals were served with care, and the flight itself felt like entering a new age. Yet high costs and noise concerns limited its reach, and by 2003, the Concorde was retired. Still, it remains a symbol of what jet engines made possible: speed beyond imagination. In the military, jets reached even greater extremes. Fighters exceeded Mach 2 and Mach 3. Reconnaissance planes skimmed the edges of space, and bombers carried payloads across continents. The jet engine allowed air forces to dominate battlefields, to patrol skies, to deter conflict through presence. Alone, yet this power carried with it responsibility and fear. A same speed that united cities also threatened them, reminding humanity that every invention has two faces. It is calming to step back from these extremes and notice the quiet principle at the heart of it all. A jet engine is, in essence, a breathing machine. It inhales air, compresses it, warms it with fire, and exhales with force. Each cycle is like a heartbeat, steady and continuous. In that rhythm lies both speed and serenity. The machine that shrinks the world rests on a simple balance of intake and release, of pressure and motion. The age of speed that jets created is not only about records and distances. It is about how humans began to live differently once the Earth became smaller. International meetings became possible, global businesses flourished, cultures mixed, and ideas spread more quickly than ever before. The world became not only connected by cables and radios, but physically woven together by air routes. The sky became a network, its paths drawn not by birds but by jets. Even now, research continues. Engines grow quieter, cleaner, more efficient. New designs seek to reduce fuel use, to explore hypersonic speeds, to return supersonic travel to civilians. Yet the core remains the same. Air enters, pressure builds, fuel ignites, exhaust flows, thrust arises. The simple cycle carries us forward, whether at 800 kilometers per hour across continents or at Mach 3 near the edge of space. So, when you think of jet engines and the age of speed, you may let yourself rest in the continuity of it all. From the hum of turbines on a runway to the whisper of contrails across the sky, jets embody both power and calm. They remind us that flight is not only about reaching farther, but also about connecting more deeply. They show that speed, though dramatic, can also be serene, a steady rhythm of air and fire carrying us smoothly through the heavens. When the first airplanes appeared in the early 20th century, their uses were experimental, their range limited, and their reliability uncertain. Yet even in those fragile beginnings, people sensed that flight could be more than novelty or spectacle. It could carry letters, goods, and eventually passengers. It could bridge cities, nations, and continents. Slowly, step by step, civil aviation emerged, weaving the sky into a network that today spans the globe. The earliest civil flights often carried mail. Airplanes were small, but they could move letters faster than trains or ships. In the 1910s and 1920s, airmail routes spread across Europe and the United States. Pilots braved weather, darkness, and mechanical failures to deliver letters that once took days in only hours. Each successful flight proved that the airplane was not only daring but useful. The hum of engines carried not just passengers, but also communication, stitching communities closer together. Soon, passengers followed. At first, flights were expensive and reserved for the wealthy. Cabins were noisy, unpressurized, and uncomfortable. Yet even so, the experience carried magic. To rise above the landscape, to see clouds from above, to arrive in distant cities in a fraction of the usual time, this was worth the discomfort. By the late 1920s, airlines were expanding, offering scheduled services across national borders. Civil aviation was no longer experiment. It was enterprise. The 1930s brought larger aircraft, such as the Douglas DC-3. Strong, reliable, and efficient, it became the backbone of many airlines. For the first time, flight was practical on a wide scale. Tickets became more affordable, flights more regular. The sky began to resemble a highway, with routes and timetables, pilots and crews, passengers and luggage. Though still limited compared to today, the foundations of civil aviation were firmly set. After World War II, aviation expanded rapidly. Wartime research had improved engines, airframes, and navigation systems. Many military planes were adapted for civilian use, while new designs arose specifically for airlines. Airports grew, runways lengthened, and control towers guided increasing numbers of flights. Civil aviation was entering its golden age. The arrival of jets in the 1950s changed everything. Airlines like Pan Am, BOAC, and Air France launched long-haul services with Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8 South. Journeys that once took days by sea now took hours by air. A trip across the Atlantic, once a grand expedition, became an overnight crossing. For the first time, the average person could imagine visiting distant countries. Business, diplomacy, and tourism all shifted into new rhythms, guided by the timetables. Of jetliners, civil aviation also transformed the passenger experience. Cabins became pressurized, allowing comfortable travel at high altitudes. Meals were served, seats reclined, windows framed blue horizons. Flying became not only efficient, but also elegant, even glamorous. Airlines competed to offer comfort and service, from fine dining to stylish uniforms. The sky was no longer only for adventurers. It was for families, executives, students, and tourists. As networks grew, so did organization. International bodies such as the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, established rules for safety, communication, and navigation. Air traffic control developed into a sophisticated system, guiding thousands of planes through shared skies without collision. Weather forecasting improved, radar extended awareness, and radio linked cockpits to towers. Civil aviation was not only about machines, but also about systems, a quiet choreography of schedules, procedures, and human skill. By the late 20th century, aviation had become essential to the global economy. Airlines carried not only passengers, but also goods, electronics, produce, medicines, machinery. Cargo planes moved at speeds ships could not match, supporting supply chains that relied on timeliness. Fresh flowers from Kenya reached markets. In Europe within a day, medicines could be flown from factories to hospitals around the world. Air freight became an invisible backbone of modern life. The rise of wide-body jets, such as the Boeing 747, further transformed travel. With greater capacity and range, they brought down costs and opened long routes across oceans and continents. Suddenly, a family in New York could visit Tokyo. A student in Paris could study in Sydney. A tourist in London could see the Amazon. Civil aviation turned the world into a web of reachable places, linked not by oceans and mountains, but by routes traced in the air. Yet the spread of air travel also carried challenges. Airports grew crowded, noise became a concern, fuel consumption rose. The very success of aviation demanded new care. Safety, too, required constant attention. But here, civil aviation proved remarkable. Year after year, improvements in training, design, and regulation made flying one of the safest forms of travel. Each departure and arrival, routine to us now, rests on a foundation of constant vigilance and calm precision. It is soothing to notice how seamlessly aviation integrates into modern life. We board planes casually, sometimes barely aware of the complexity behind them. We read a book, rest, or watch clouds while thousands of details unfold quietly around us. Navigation, communication, coordination. For the passenger, flight feels calm, almost ordinary. For the system, it is a carefully managed harmony built on decades of refinement. Today, civil aviation is vast. Thousands of flights cross the globe every hour, connecting cities and continents in a rhythm as regular as tides. Low-cost carriers bring affordable travel to millions. Global hubs like Heathrow, Dubai, and Singapore serve as crossroads of nations. Even remote islands receive goods and visitors thanks to aviation. The network is everywhere, invisible, but essential, like a circulatory system for the planet. And yet, behind all the technology, the principle is the same as in the beginning. Airplanes lift on wings, guided through air, supported by trust. The difference is scale, refinement, and connection. What once carried a few letters across a valley now carries millions of people across oceans daily. The dream of civil aviation has become reality so complete that we often forget its wonder. So, when you think of civil aviation and the global network of air travel, you may let yourself rest in the knowledge of connection. Every contrail in the sky is a thread in a larger web, binding cities, families, and cultures. The network is not only mechanical, but human, a reflection of our need to meet, to share, to move. It reminds us that the sky, once unreachable, is now part of daily life. The calm hum of engines above is not noise, but reassurance, a sign that the world is quietly, steadily, in motion together. When we imagine flight, we often picture the smooth curve of wings, the long glide of an airplane through the sky. Yet there is another path, one that does not rely on forward motion, one that allows rising straight upward, hovering in stillness, and descending gently in place. This is the path of vertical flight, embodied most clearly in the helicopter. Unlike airplanes, helicopters do not require runways, do not need long stretches of air to gather lift. They take off and land wherever they are, lifting quietly on. The spinning rhythm of rotors. Their story is one of persistence, invention, and the discovery that there are many ways to join the air. The idea of vertical flight is ancient. In China, As early as the 4th century, children played with bamboo flying toys, simple sticks with blades that spun when twirled between the hands. These Chinese tops rose briefly into the air, powered by rotation. They were small, playful, but they revealed a principle: spinning wings could lift. Centuries later, such toys would inspire inventors in Europe, including Leonardo da Vinci, who sketched his famous aerial screw, a device shaped like a spiral meant to rise by turning through the air. Though his design never flew, it reflected the enduring fascination with vertical ascent. The difficulty was not in the idea, but in the execution. To hover requires constant lift equal to weight, generated not by gliding, but by continuous thrust. This demands power, stability, and control. For centuries, no materials or engines were light and strong enough to achieve it. Balloons could rise vertically, but they drifted with the wind and lacked precision. Airplanes could travel far, but they needed space to move. The dream of true vertical flight remained unsolved in the 19th century. Experiments began with small models, powered by rubber bands or springs. They showed promise, but scaling up to human size proved impossible with the technology of the time. The invention of lightweight internal combustion engines in the 20th century changed the equation. Suddenly, enough power could be generated in a small frame to make continuous vertical lift possible. The first practical helicopter is often credited to Igor Sikorsky, a Russian-born engineer who emigrated to the United States. In 1939, his VS-300 prototype rose into the air, demonstrating stability and control. Unlike earlier attempts, Sikorsky's design included a main rotor to provide lift and a smaller tail rotor to counteract torque, the tendency of the fuselage to spin in the opposite direction of the blades. This combination proved effective, and it remains the basic configuration of most helicopters today. Helicopters quickly proved their value. During World War II, they were used for observation, transport, and rescue. In later decades, they became essential in civilian life, lifting patients to hospitals, reaching stranded climbers on mountains, delivering supplies to remote villages, carrying workers to offshore oil platforms. Their ability to hover, to move vertically, and to maneuver in tight spaces made them irreplaceable in situations where airplanes could not operate. Technically, helicopters achieve lift by spinning rotor blades shaped like narrow wings. As each blade cuts through the air, it generates lift, just like the wing of an airplane. But because the blades rotate, lift is created continuously around a central axis. By tilting the rotor disc, the helicopter can move forward, backward, or sideways. By adjusting the angle of each blade as it spins, a system known as collective and cyclic pitch control, pilots can climb, descend, or hover with remarkable precision. To the observer, helicopters often appear almost magical. They rise vertically from a patch of ground, pause motionless in the sky, then drift gently forward. Their motion is less like the soaring of birds and more like the hovering of insects, able to stop and start at will. This quality gives them a unique presence in the air, not swift like jets, not gliding like planes, but balanced in place, poised between motion and stillness. Helicopters also symbolize rescue and care. They appear in emergencies, lowering ropes, to stranded hikers, lifting flood victims from rooftops, carrying the injured to hospitals. In such moments, the sound of rotor blades, the steady whop, 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 becomes a sign of safety, a reminder that help can arrive even where roads do not reach. The helicopter is not only a machine of transport, but also of compassion, bridging the gap between isolation and aid. Their versatility extends beyond rescue. Police forces use them to patrol cities, news agencies to report from the sky, scientists to study wildlife or glaciers, filmmakers to capture sweeping scenes. In the military, helicopters carry troops, supplies, and sometimes weapons, able to insert or extract forces in places airplanes cannot land. In agriculture, they spray crops. In construction, they lift heavy loads into place. Few machines match the adaptability of vertical flight, yet helicopters also carry challenges. They are complex to design and difficult to fly. The constant adjustments required to maintain stability make piloting demanding. Their engines consume significant fuel, their moving parts wear quickly, and their speed is modest compared to airplanes. Still, their advantages outweigh their limits. Where precision and access matter more than speed, helicopters remain unmatched. It is calming to reflect on how helicopters expanded our relationship with the sky. They showed that flight is not only about distance or height, but also about place, the ability to reach exactly where one needs to go. They turned the inaccessible into the reachable, not by overwhelming power, but by steady balance. Their gift is not speed, but presence, the ability to hover quietly in one spot. Like a dragonfly above water. Modern research continues to refine vertical flight. New designs explore tilt rotors, where engines pivot to combine airplane speed with helicopter flexibility. Drones, small and agile, use similar principles to hover and maneuver with ease. Electric motors promise quieter, more efficient helicopters in the future. The principle, however, remains the same: spinning blades, continuous lift, steady control. So, the story of helicopters and vertical flight carries a gentle lesson. It reminds us that there are many ways to meet the sky. Airplanes taught us to glide and soar, but helicopters taught us to pause, to rise straight upward, to remain still in the air. They showed that flight can be about arrival as much as journey, about presence as much as speed. To watch one hover is to sense the calm, balance of forces, the steady conversation between machine and air. And in that hovering, there is something deeply human. It is the expression of care, of persistence, of adaptability. Helicopters remind us that flight is not only about reaching distant places, but also about tending to the near, the immediate, the urgent. They embody a quieter kind of progress. Not dramatic leaps across oceans, but steady rises above rooftops, rivers, and mountains, wherever help or connection is needed most. Long before satellites circled the Earth, long before astronauts left the atmosphere, the idea of leaving the planet lived quietly in human imagination. To look at the stars is to feel both wonder and distance. They shine with clarity, yet remain impossibly far. Across centuries, people gazed upward, dreaming of journeys beyond the sky. At first, these were myths and stories, flights of gods, chariots of fire, stairways to heaven. But slowly, across time, the dream took form in something practical. The rocket. The principle of a rocket is ancient, simple, and profound. To move forward by pushing backward. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This law of motion, written by Isaac Newton in the 17th century, explained what humanity had already glimpsed in small ways, in the flight of arrows, the recoil of cannons, the bursts of fireworks. Push in one direction, and motion occurs in the other. This truth would one day carry humans beyond Earth. The earliest rockets appeared in China more than 1,000 years ago. By the 13th century, gunpowder-filled tubes attached to arrows were launched in battle, producing both noise and fear. These fire arrows were crude, unpredictable, and short-ranged, but they revealed a principle. Chemical energy could be directed into thrust. From China, the idea spread to the Middle East and Europe, where rockets were used in warfare and celebrations. For centuries, they remained simple devices of fire and spectacle. Powerful but imprecise in the 17th and 18th centuries, interest in rockets grew. They were still weapons, but they inspired curiosity. In India, Missourian, rockets used metal casings for greater strength and range, surprising British forces during battles. Later, William Congreve in Britain developed improved versions, which were used in the Napoleonic Wars, and even gave rise to the line, "The rocket's red glare," in the American national anthem. Yet these rockets, though more advanced, were still inaccurate and unstable. They could not yet serve the dream of reaching beyond the sky. The shift from firework to science began in the 19th century. In Russia, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, a quiet schoolteacher, began writing about space travel. Living in rural poverty, he nevertheless imagined rockets that could climb into orbit. He realized that only rockets could function in the vacuum of space, since they carry their own propellant. In 1903, he published a paper outlining the rocket equation, showing mathematically how a rocket could escape Earth's gravity by expelling mass at high speed. Tsiolkovsky's work was theoretical, but it laid the foundation of astronautics. He once wrote that Earth is the cradle of humanity, but one cannot live in the cradle forever. His words captured both vision and patience. Humanity was meant to grow upward. In America, Robert H. Goddard carried the dream into experiment. Fascinated by science fiction and fireworks as a child, he later studied physics and turned imagination into engineering. In 1919, he published A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes, describing how rockets could travel into space. He built and launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926, a slender device that flew only 12 meters, but proved the principle. Over the next decades, Goddard developed gyroscopic controls, steering nozzles, and stage designs. He worked mostly in solitude, often ridiculed by the press, but his experiments shaped the path that would later send rockets into orbit. In Germany, Hermann Oberth, inspired by Jules Verne and Tsiolkovsky, published the rocket interplanetary space in 1923. His book inspired a generation of engineers and enthusiasts. Societies formed to study rocketry, and experiments multiplied. Among those inspired was a young Werner von Braun, who would later play a central role in both German wartime rockets and the American space program. The vision of space travel was no longer only fantasy. It was slowly becoming engineering. During the 1930s and 1940s, rocketry advanced quickly, though often in dark contexts. In Germany, the V-2 rocket, designed under von Braun's team, became the first long-range ballistic missile. It rose into the edge of space before descending toward its targets. Though created as a weapon, the V-2 demonstrated capabilities that no other machine had achieved: supersonic speed, high altitude, and guidance systems. For the first time, rockets touched the boundary of space, even if briefly. Elsewhere, smaller groups continued experiments. In the United States, Goddard refined his designs until his death in 1945. In the Soviet Union, engineers drew on Tsiolkovsky's vision, continuing tests in secrecy. Though driven by military funding, the work kept alive the larger dream that one day rockets would serve not war, but exploration. Science fiction also nourished imagination. Writers like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne described voyages to the moon, planets, and beyond. Their stories gave shape to possibilities, inspiring both the public and future scientists. The line between fiction and engineering blurred, each feeding the other. To read about journeys to Mars or lunar expeditions was not only entertainment. It was practice for the imagination, a way of rehearsing the future. By the mid-20th century, the elements were in place. Tsiolkovsky had given the equations, Goddard the prototypes, Oberth the inspiration, von Braun and others the large-scale engineering. Rockets were no longer toys or curiosities. They were powerful, precise, and capable of reaching into the upper atmosphere. The dream of spaceflight was poised on the edge of realization. And yet, it is calming to notice that these beginnings were not sudden. They unfolded over centuries, through toys, fireworks, theories, and experiments. Each step was modest, fragile, incomplete. But together, they carried humanity closer to the stars. The path from fire arrows to liquid-fueled rockets is long, but its rhythm is steady. It shows that dreams need patience, that progress grows quietly, that imagination and experiment must walk together. So, when we think of rockets before Sputnik, we may let ourselves feel the calm persistence of the journey. The first sparks in China, the equations in Russia, the experiments in America, the books in Europe, all of these formed a chorus of voices pointing upward. They remind us that the sky was never a boundary, but a beginning. And they show that even before the first satellite rose, the dream of spaceflight was already alive, steady as a heartbeat, waiting for the moment to ascend. On an autumn night in 1957, a small polished sphere with 4 thin antennas rose into orbit. It was called Sputnik 1, and it carried only a simple radio transmitter, sending out calm signals, beep, 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 that could be heard around the world. The satellite was small, less than the size of a beach ball, yet its meaning was vast. For the first time, humanity had placed an object beyond Earth's grasp, circling the planet as a man-made star. The space age had begun. Sputnik's flight was brief in duration. Its batteries lasted only weeks, and it burned in the atmosphere within months, but its impact was permanent. The satellite confirmed that orbit was possible, that rockets could reach the necessary speed to circle Earth without falling. For scientists, it was proof of principle. For ordinary people, it was wonder visible in the night sky. Anyone who looked up could see a point of light passing overhead and know that it was not a star, but a creation of human hands. The beeping signals of Sputnik resonated far beyond their technical role. They stirred curiosity in children, urgency in governments, and awe in anyone who listened. The Cold War gave the achievement political weight, yet beyond rivalry, the satellite carried a more universal truth. Space was no longer unreachable. The boundary between imagination and reality had shifted quietly, carried by a small sphere orbiting every 96 minutes. Only 4 years later, on April 12, 1961, that door opened wider. This time it was not a satellite, but a person, a young pilot named Yuri Gagarin, who left the Earth. His spacecraft, Vostok 1, was small and functional, designed only for survival. Inside, Gagarin wore a bright orange suit, strapped into a single seat. He had little control of the craft, which was guided mostly by automatic systems. Yet when the rocket's engines roared and the capsule reached orbit, Gagarin became the first human being to circle the planet. His flight lasted just 108 minutes, a single orbit. But within that orbit, history changed. He experienced weightlessness, looked out at the curve of the Earth, and spoke words that remain etched in memory. "I see Earth. It is so beautiful." From above, he saw continents and oceans pass beneath him, the planet suspended in silence. For the first time, a human eye had looked back at Earth from space, not as a dream, but as direct experience. Re-entry was difficult. the capsule tumbling briefly before parachutes deployed. Gagarin ejected and landed safely in a field, to the surprise of local farmers. When they saw the smiling young man in his suit, they realized they were witnessing the return of the first traveler from space. His safe landing was not just a Soviet triumph, but a milestone for all humanity. Together, Sputnik and Gagarin marked the true dawn of the space age. Sputnik proved that machines could orbit. Gagarin proved that people could endure and return. The dream of millennia, to rise beyond the sky, had become fact within a single decade. For the Soviet Union, these were victories of science and prestige. For the world, they were symbols of possibility that schools shifted their lessons toward. Science and engineering, children looked upward with new imagination, and artists, writers, and musicians found inspiration in the stars. The calm pulse of Sputnik and the radiant smile of Gagarin carried a message deeper than politics. Humanity was no longer bound to Earth. Alone, it is soothing to remember how modest these beginnings were. A small sphere with a radio. A young pilot. Making one orbit. No long missions, no colonies, no great technology compared to today. Yet their meaning was immense. They showed that progress is not measured only by scale, but by thresholds. To cross the boundary into orbit, even briefly, was to step into a new era. From that moment onward, the sky was no longer the limit, but the beginning. The dawn of this space age did not arrive with grandeur, but with calm signals and a single orbiting smile. Together, Sputnik and Gagarin turned humanity's gaze outward, inviting us gently into the wider cosmos. On the evening of July 20th, 1969, the world paused. Across continents, millions gathered around televisions and radios, their attention fixed on a single event, the first human landing on the moon. The mission was Apollo 11, and its crew, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, carried with them the patient work of thousands and the longing of centuries. The moment was not only a triumph of technology, but also a quiet turning point in human history. The path to the moon was shaped by both rivalry and vision. In 1961, U.S. President John F. Kennedy had set the challenge of landing a person on the moon before the decade's end. The Cold War gave urgency, but the deeper motive was curiosity, to prove that humans could reach beyond Earth, live briefly in another world, and return safely. The Apollo program grew into a vast undertaking, uniting scientists, engineers, and workers across the United States. It was a collective effort, one built not on sudden leaps, but on careful steps. Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, each preparing for the next. The spacecraft itself was composed of 3 parts. The command module, Columbia, would remain in lunar orbit with Michael Collins aboard. The service module provided power and propulsion. The lunar module, Eagle, was the delicate craft designed for descent. Its shape was unfamiliar, more insect than airplane, but it was built for purpose, not beauty. Thin walls, spindly legs, and a fragile frame, just enough to land 2 men safely and lift them back again. On July 16th, the Saturn V rocket carried Apollo 11 into space. Its roar was immense, but once in orbit, the motion became steady, calm. For 3 days, the astronauts traveled through space, the Earth shrinking behind them, the moon growing larger ahead. Their journey was quiet, measured by radio calls and steady checklists. In the vastness of space, the spacecraft was a fragile bubble of life, carrying its crew toward a world that had never known footsteps. The landing itself was tense. As Armstrong and Aldrin descended in the Eagle, they saw boulders and craters at the planned site. With fuel running low, Armstrong took manual control, guiding the craft to a clear patch of ground. At last, his calm voice reached Earth. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Relief spread through mission control. Applause echoed, and the world exhaled. Hours later, Armstrong stepped down the ladder. His words, heard by millions, became part of history. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." His foot pressed into fine lunar dust, leaving a footprint that may last for thousands of years. Soon after, Aldrin joined, him describing the landscape as magnificent desolation. Together, they planted the American flag, set up experiments, and collected samples. Their movements were slow, deliberate, shaped by caution and awe. Above them, Collins orbited alone in Columbia, keeping the link between Earth and Moon. He later reflected that he felt no loneliness, only responsibility to guard the path home for his companions. His solitude completed the symmetry of the mission. Two men walking on another world, one man circling above, all three bound together in purpose. The view from the moon was unlike any before. The sky was black, even in daylight, the horizon close, the Earth a shining sphere suspended in darkness. From that vantage point, humanity's home looked fragile, small, and unified. No borders, no divisions, only a blue and white jewel. The image of Earth rising above the lunar horizon became an icon, inspiring environmental awareness and a sense of shared destiny. The return was as vital as the landing. After more than 2 hours on the surface, Armstrong and Aldrin lifted off, and the ascent stage of Eagle, rejoining Collins in orbit. Together, they traveled back to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down safely in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th. The mission lasted just over 8 days, but its legacy continues across generations. The moon landing was not conquest, but connection. It showed that humanity could leave its cradle, touch another world, and return. It demonstrated cooperation on a scale never before achieved, with hundreds of thousands contributing quietly, from engineers designing circuits to seamstresses stitching spacesuits. The success belonged not only to the astronauts, but to an entire collective of human effort. Culturally, the event carried profound meaning. It entered classrooms, inspired art and music, and shaped imaginations worldwide. Children looked upward with new dreams. Writers imagined colonies, and scientists planned future missions. The moon, once a distant companion, had become a neighbor. Visited. It is calming to reflect that the achievement was not loud in its essence. The landing was cautious, the steps slow, the words simple. Progress here was measured in steady movements, not in spectacle. The footprints on the moon remind us that greatness often arrives quietly, through patience and care. Today, only 12 humans have walked on the moon. Yet those steps proved the principle. We are capable of leaving Earth, capable of exploring, capable of seeing ourselves from new perspectives. The moon remains, its dust still marked, its silence still holding the memory of voices from 1969. So, when we think of the moon landing, we may allow ourselves a calm sense of wonder. It was not just a leap for technology, but a mirror for humanity, showing us both how far we can reach and how small we remain. The gentle steps on the sea of tranquility remind us that the sky is not an end but a beginning, and that even in vastness, our journey can be measured in footprints placed with care. When Apollo 11 touched the moon in 1969, it seemed as though the greatest step had already been taken. Humans had left Earth, set foot on another world, and returned. Yet the journey did not end there. In the decades that followed, rockets continued to evolve. The focus shifted from singular triumphs to sustainability, from national prestige to global cooperation, and eventually to the rise of private enterprise. The story of modern rockets is not only about power, but about persistence, about building ways to live and travel in space as part of ordinary life. After Apollo, attention turned to reusability. Rockets until then were discarded after each flight, falling into oceans or burning in the atmosphere. This made every mission costly. The idea of a reusable spacecraft promised something different, a vehicle that could launch, return, and fly again, reducing cost and opening space to more frequent journeys. The answer was the Space Shuttle. First launched in 1981, the shuttle resembled both a rocket and an airplane. It rode to orbit on large boosters and a fuel tank, then returned gliding on wings. It carried satellites, telescopes, laboratories, and crews. For 30 years, it served as a workhorse of American spaceflight. The shuttle launched the Hubble Space Telescope, which revealed galaxies billions of light-years away. It carried modules and supplies to build the International Space Station, a permanent home in orbit. Its flights became routine, yet each carried the quiet significance of reuse, of building space travel not as one-time spectacle, but as ongoing service. But the shuttle also revealed challenges. It was complex, expensive, and not as safe as hoped. Two tragic accidents, Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003, showed the risks of re-entry and launch. Each loss carried grief, but also lessons, reminding humanity that space is unforgiving and progress requires constant vigilance. After its retirement in 2011, the shuttle left behind a legacy of both achievement and humility. Meanwhile, other nations advanced their own programs. The Soviet Union developed Soyuz, a simpler, capsule-based design that proved reliable and long-lived. Soyuz remains in use today, carrying astronauts to the International Space Station. Europe built Ariane rockets for commercial satellites. Japan launched its H-2 series, and China began building its own space stations and lunar probes. Spaceflight became not only a competition, but also a shared endeavor, a global tapestry of effort. The 21st century brought a new chapter, private spaceflight. Companies such as SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others began designing rockets with bold goals, lowering costs, increasing access, and eventually enabling human settlement beyond Earth. SpaceX's Falcon 9 introduced reusable boosters that land vertically, like towers returning gently to Earth. The sight of rockets descending in controlled landings, once science fiction, became real. Blue Origin tested suborbital tourism, offering passengers a few minutes of weightlessness. Virgin Galactic pursued similar paths with spaceplanes. These efforts showed that space was no longer only for governments. It was becoming a domain for private visionaries as well. Modern rockets also look outward to new destinations. Probes have reached Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond. Rovers wander Martian plains, drilling into soil, searching for signs of past water and life. Telescopes in orbit peer deep into cosmic history, tracing the origins of galaxies. Plans grow for human missions to Mars, though still distant. Engineers design habitats, life support systems, and long-duration vehicles. The dream of becoming a multi-planet species, once poetic, is now discussed in practical terms. Yet even in this progress, humility remains. Rockets are powerful, but they are also fragile. Launch windows depend on weather. Payloads must be balanced carefully, and every system checked and rechecked. Spaceflight is still young, still shaped by learning. Each success builds slowly on the one before. The rhythm is gradual, Like footsteps along a long path. It is soothing to notice how much cooperation has grown. The International Space Station, built by nations once rivals, orbits as a symbol of shared effort. Astronauts from many countries live and work together, conducting experiments in biology, physics, and medicine. They float in weightlessness, tending to plants, studying the human body, testing materials. Their work is quiet, steady, without spectacle, yet it prepares the way for deeper journeys. Looking ahead, rockets may carry us not only to Mars, but also to asteroids, to lunar bases, to orbiting hotels or laboratories. New fuels, lighter materials, and advanced engines promise greater efficiency. Electric propulsion, nuclear concepts, and even dreams of fusion appear in discussions. Each idea reflects a continuation of the same human impulse: to rise, to explore, to extend presence outward. The future of flight, whether in Earth's skies or beyond, rests on the same principles that guided the first balloons and gliders: patience, observation, persistence. The Montgolfiers watched smoke rise. The Wrights measured wings in a wind tunnel. Gagarin smiled from orbit. Armstrong stepped on dust. Each moment was quiet but decisive. Modern rockets follow the same rhythm. Not sudden conquest, but gradual expansion. So, when we think of modern rockets and the future of flight, we may let ourselves feel calm assurance. The path is long, but it is unfolding. From reusable shuttles to private landings, from satellites to Martian plans, each step carries us farther. The story is not finished, and perhaps it never will be. Flight has always been less about arrival than about journey, less about speed than about perspective. The stars remain distant, yet closer than ever, and the rhythm of rockets continues to carry humanity gently outward. You have listened to the Sleepy Brain Dose. Thank you for joining this quiet exploration of flight, from wings to space. Now, you may simply let go, allow your breath to slow, and drift into sleep. The sky will still be there tomorrow. For now, rest well and good night.